black veteran went to a restaurant with his son, but the restaurant owner didn't recognize the son and treated them badly because of their race. What happened next was shocking and changed everything for everyone involved. In a small town where everyone knows each other, one unfair act at a local diner changes everything. The diner's owner makes a big mistake when he refuses to serve a respected veteran. The veteran, feeling hurt and shocked, leaves quietly. The owner assumes the issue is over, but he couldn't be more wrong. He doesn't realize that someone powerful has noticed what happened. Soon, the entire town will face its own prejudices and learn an important lesson about forgiveness and change. Cole Carter, a tired old man, slowly stepped out of his beaten-up pickup truck. His body ached with age and the toll of years spent serving his country. The warm southern sun shone down on his lined face as he looked at the worn-out sign of Mark's Diner. He couldn't help but smile a little. He had been coming here for years because of the good food and welcoming atmosphere. As Cole opened the door, the soft jingle of bells announced his entrance. The smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon filled the air, making his smarkash rumble. He slowly walked to his regular seat at the counter, nodding politely at a few familiar faces. But something seemed off today. The usual chatter in the diner died down when he walked in, leaving an uncomfortable quiet. Cole could feel people staring at him, tracking his every move. He tried to brush off the feeling, blaming it on his old soldier's habit of being too alert. As he sat down at the counter, he saw Mark Harris, the diner owner, come out from the kitchen. Normally, Mark greeted him with a big smile, but today his face was stern and cold. His sharp gaze made Cole shift uneasily in his chair. "What'll it be, Cole?" Mark asked, his voice rough and lacking its usual warmth. Cole, deciding to ignore Mark's strange behavior, smiled gently. "Just the usual, Mark. Coffee and a slice of your famous apple pie." Mark's jaw tightened, and his grip on the counter became so firm his knuckles turned white. "Sorry, Cole, but you can't have any pie today. We're out of it." Cole frowned in confusion. He could see a freshly baked apple pie right there on the counter, just a few feet away. "But Mark, I can see—" "I said we're out." Mark's voice was suddenly loud, startling a few customers nearby. "Actually, we're closing early today. You need to leave." The diner fell into awkward silence. Cole sat there stunned, trying to understand what was happening. He'd been coming to Mark's Diner for years and had never been treated like this. The other customers shifted nervously. Some looked away, while others stared in disbelief. Cole slowly stood up, his hands trembling. "Mark, did I do something wrong?" Mark's face hardened, anger dripping from his words. "You being here is the problem. I don't serve people like you. Get out or I'll call the cops." Cole felt as if he'd been punched. He stepped back, eyes wide with shock and pain. Memories of similar treatment in his youth flashed through his mind. But this was different. This was Mark, a man he thought of as a friend. As Cole headed toward the door, a young woman at a nearby table suddenly stood up. "This isn't right," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't treat him like this." Mark turned on her, his face red with fury. "This is my diner, and I'll do things my way. If you have a problem, you can leave too." Caught between wanting to do the right thing and her fear of confrontation, the woman sat back down, guilt on her face, as she watched Cole quietly leave. As Cole stepped outside, the diner buzzed with hushed conversations. Some customers quickly paid and left, unwilling to support such open discrimination. Others stayed, either agreeing with Mark or too stunned to react. Mark didn't realize that his actions would set off a chain of events that would change the whole town. If only Mark knew who Cole Carter truly was, he might have thought twice. Now Mark had made a mistake that would come back to haunt him. Cole slowly made his way to his truck, his mind spinning from what had just happened. The sunlight that had felt warm earlier now seemed cruel, highlighting the harsh reality of what he faced. He climbed into his truck, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. For a while, Cole just sat there, overwhelmed by pain and humiliation. But then something shifted in Cole's expression. His jaw tightened with resolve, and a spark lit in his eyes. Cole Carter was many things: a veteran, a father, a respected man. But he wouldn't accept injustice without a fight. As he started the truck, his mind raced with ideas. Mark's diner may have shut its door on him, but this was just the beginning. Mark Harris had no clue that his actions would turn their quiet town upside down. Back at the diner, Mark felt the fallout. Several regulars had left, some giving him cold stares, but Mark stayed firm, believing he'd done what his father would have wanted. Why then did he feel so uneasy? As the day went on, word about the incident spread quickly. People gathered in small groups, shocked that Mark, who always seemed friendly, could hold such prejudice against Cole Carter, a respected community member. Meanwhile, Luke Carter, Cole's son, was in his Washington, D.C. office when a family friend called him. Luke's grip on the phone tightened as he listened to what had happened to his father. Luke wasn't just any concerned son. He was a powerful U.S. senator known for his work on civil rights and veterans' issues. Now, his father had faced open discrimination. The irony only fueled his determination to correct this wrong. After hanging up, Luke sat back, his mind racing. He had the power to bring the law down hard on Mark Harris and make an example out of him. But he knew that might only deepen the divide. This called for a different plan. Luke leaned forward and picked up his phone again. He had important calls to make and favours to ask. Mark Harris had no idea what was about to come his way, but Luke was determined to handle it in a way that would leave a lasting impact. As the sun set on the small southern town, casting shadows across the quiet streets, the stage was set for a showdown. One man's prejudice was about to clash with a son's fight for his father's dignity. And when it was all over, the town would never be the same. What happened next would shock everyone and deliver a powerful lesson about the consequences of hate. The next morning was bright and clear, but there was a tension in the air that felt like static. News of what happened to Cole Carter at Mark's diner had spread quickly, and the whole town was buzzing with talk about what might come next. Mark Harris got to the diner early, just like he always did to get ready for the day. But as he approached the front door, he noticed something unusual. A small crowd had gathered outside, holding signs that said, "No to racism and equality for all." Mark's face turned red with anger as he shoved past them, his hands shaking as he unlocked the door. Inside, Mark tried to focus on his usual tasks, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was about to happen. Every time the bell above the door jingled, he flinched, half expecting to see Cole Carter or the police walk in. But as the morning dragged on and nothing happened, Mark started to relax. Maybe, he thought, this would all blow over soon. Mark's brief sense of relief didn't last long. As the lunch crowd started to roll in, the bell above the door jingled again. Mark looked up and felt his heart skip a beat. A man he didn't recognize stood in the doorway, but there was something about him that drew attention. He was tall, dressed sharply, and had a commanding presence that immediately put Mark on edge. The man walked up to the counter, his eyes scanning the room, before locking onto Mark. "Are you Mark Harris?" he asked, his voice steady, but with a sharp undertone. Mark nodded, unable to speak. The man's gaze narrowed slightly as he studied Mark's face. "I'm Luke Carter," he said, and Mark felt a chill run through him. "Cole Carter's son. We need to talk about what happened here yesterday." Mark's mind raced. He had heard whispers that Cole's son was in politics, but he had brushed them off as nothing more than rumours. Now, standing face to face with Luke Carter, Mark felt a brief surge of fear. But his pride, along with his long-held prejudices, quickly smothered it. Mark crossed his arms, his voice rough. "Listen, I don't care who you are. This is my diner, and I can refuse service to anyone I want." Luke's face stayed calm, but his eyes held a sharp, dangerous glint. "Is that right?" he replied quietly. "And why did you refuse service to my father? A veteran who has lived in this town longer than you've been around?" Mark's face turned red with anger. I don't owe you any explanations, he snapped. Your father and people like him aren't welcome here. That's it. The diner fell silent. The other customers watched, both shocked and intrigued by the tense exchange. Luke didn't move. His eyes locked on Mark. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled but seething with quiet anger, causing Mark to instinctively take a step back. Mr. Harris, Luke began calmly, I came here hoping we could talk this through, but I see that's not possible. So let me be clear. What you did yesterday wasn't just wrong. It was against the law, and I will use every tool at my disposal to make sure you face the consequences. For a moment, Mark's tough attitude wavered. What are you talking about? You can't do anything to me. This is my business. Luke's smile was cold, devoid of kindness. Oh, Mr. Harris, he said quietly, you have no idea who you're up against. I'm not just Cole Carter's son. I'm a US senator, and I've spent my entire career fighting the kind of prejudice you showed yesterday. The blood drained from Mark's face as he realized the gravity of his mistake. He hadn't just thrown out a local resident. He'd insulted the father of a senator, a man with the power to turn his world upside down. Luke gave Mark one last look before heading for the door. This isn't over, he said quietly. You'll be hearing from me again soon. As the door swung shut behind Luke, the diner buzzed with murmurs. Mark stood still behind the counter, the weight of what he had done finally hitting him. He had believed he was standing up for the values his father had taught him. But now, with the realization of who he had crossed, Mark started to wonder if those beliefs were worth the cost he might soon face. Luke Carter's visit was only the beginning. Legal actions were already in motion, and Mark's life was about to be turned upside down. The quiet little town, too, would soon be swept into a storm that would challenge long-held prejudices and force a reckoning with the deeper issues hiding beneath its calm surface. As Luke walked away from the diner, he pulled out his phone. It's done, he said, his voice firm. He's as stubborn as we expected. Time to move forward with phase 2. Mark Harris sat behind the counter, his hands trembling as he tried to serve a cup of coffee, spilling most of it. The weight of the day pressed down on him, making it hard to focus. He had always thought of himself as a decent man, someone respected in the town. But now, with everything that had happened, doubt began to creep into his mind. As the hours passed, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that his life was on the verge of falling apart. Every time the door opened and the bell rang, he tensed, expecting federal agents or lawyers to walk in. But what he feared most wasn't a big confrontation. Instead, it was the quiet disapproval of the people around him. Customers who had once been regulars no longer met his eyes, and some didn't come in at all. Those who did were quiet, the usual lively conversations replaced by uncomfortable silence. Mark could feel their stares even if they didn't say anything. It was clear they were judging him. As the day came to an end, Mark sank into one of the booths, exhausted. The diner, usually busy at this time, was nearly empty. For the first time, Mark started to question whether he had made a huge mistake. Across town, Cole Carter sat in his small living room, surrounded by memories of his past. He picked up an old photo of himself with his late wife, taken on the day he returned from the war. They looked young, full of hope. "Oh, Margaret," he murmured, brushing his fingers over her face. "What would you think of all this?" The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted his thoughts. A moment later, the door opened and Luke walked in. Father and son hugged, both feeling the weight of recent events. "How did it go?" Cole asked, settling into his chair. Luke sighed. "Just like we thought, Dad. He's stubborn, but we have a plan." Cole nodded slowly. "I never thought it would come to this. Mark and I weren't close, but I thought there was respect between us. Finding out he sees me as less just because of my skin, it cuts deep." Luke leaned forward, holding his father's hand. "I know, Dad. That's why we can't let this slide. What happened to you isn't just about you. It's about everyone who still faces this kind of treatment. We need to make a stand." Cole looked at his son, seeing the same determination to fight for what was right. that had driven him when he was younger. A mix of pride and sadness filled him. This wasn't the world he wanted to pass on to his son, but he was thankful that Luke had the strength and the influence to push for change. "So what's next?" Cole asked, his voice steadier now. Luke's eyes lit up with resolve and a touch of something more, a plan already in the works. "Here's where it gets interesting, Dad. I did some research, and it turns out Mark's diner isn't doing as well as people think. He's been trying to sell it for a while." Cole looked surprised. "Sell the diner? It's been in his family for ages." Luke nodded. "That's right, but he's been holding on to it, hoping for the right buyer. After what happened, though, I think he might be willing to let it go, especially if someone makes him a decent offer." Cole leaned back, deep in thought. "And what are you thinking, Luke?" Luke's smile was firm, with a hint of playfulness. "Let's just say Mark Harris is about to get an offer he can't turn down. And when everything is said and done, that diner will stand for something very different from what it does now." As darkness settled over the small town, change was quietly taking root. Mark Harris had no idea that his life was about to be flipped upside down in ways he couldn't have imagined. The days ahead would challenge the community, making everyone face their own prejudices and assumptions. The next morning, Mark arrived at the diner even earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much, tormented by restless dreams of angry crowds and lawsuits. As he unlocked the door, he spotted a thick envelope lying on the floor. With shaking hands, he picked it up and ripped it open. Inside was a formal document, and as Mark read through it, his face turned pale. It was an offer to buy his diner, at almost twice its current value. The offer came from an anonymous buyer, through a law firm he didn't recognize. At the bottom of the letter, a note read, "This offer expires soon and requires you to leave the business immediately. You also agree not to open another diner nearby." Early the next morning, the sun barely touching the horizon, Mark Harris unlocked his diner with a heavy heart. The usual routine felt different, weighed down by everything that had happened. As he moved inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. While tidying up, he found an envelope slipped under the door. Curious, Mark opened it. Inside was an offer to buy the diner for more than what it was worth. The offer required him to leave the business immediately and not open another in the area. The timing felt strange, coming just after the recent conflict with Cole Carter. Mark's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. It was Sarah, his trusted waitress of many years. She walked in slowly, her face serious, as if she had something on her mind. "Morning, Mark," she said quietly. "I've been hearing a lot around town about what happened yesterday. People are upset, saying they don't want to come here anymore." Mark's face tightened, but he stayed silent. He could feel the weight of the community's disapproval creeping in, just like the shadows stretching across the empty diner. At the end of a quiet afternoon, Mark sat alone in his diner. The air felt thick, and the usual comforting hum of conversation was nowhere to be heard. The absence of his regulars weighed heavily on him, and the empty tables told a story he couldn't ignore. Mark sighed deeply and pulled the crumpled letter from his pocket. He stared at the offer to buy his diner, his mind racing. It was tempting. The business had been on a slow decline for years, and this was a way out. An easy way to leave behind the mess he'd made. Yet something about it felt like defeat. The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. The front door creaked open, and Mark looked up to see Sarah standing there. She'd been with him for years, through both good and bad times. "You should go home, Sarah," Mark said, his voice strained. "There's not much work to do today." Sarah walked over, her shoes softly tapping on the floor. "Mark, you know things won't improve unless you do something. People are upset." Mark gritted his teeth, reluctant to hear her. "It's not my fault. I run my business how I see fit." "But people don't see it that way," Sarah replied. "Mr. Carter didn't deserve what happened. Folks won't forget it. You can't dig in your heels this time." Mark didn't respond. Deep down, he knew she was right. The town and the world had changed, but he had clung to the past, and now it was catching up with him. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the empty street. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt the weight of those shadows pressing down on him. Grief and anger had twisted Mark Senior's heart, turning his pain into hatred. He blamed all black people for the loss of his friend, failing to see that it was the war, not skin colour, that caused the hurt. Now, as Cole opened his eyes, he felt sadness. He understood where Mark Jr.'s prejudice came from. It was passed down through pain, but understanding didn't make it right. He knew that if things were going to change, that painful cycle had to end. At the diner, Mark Jr. was locking up when he heard a knock at the door. He looked up to see Luke Carter standing outside. For a moment, Mark thought about ignoring him, but something in Luke's face stopped him. With a deep sigh, he unlocked the door. "We're done for the night," Mark muttered. Luke stepped in anyway. "I'm not here for food, Mark. We need to talk." Mark considered telling him to leave, but instead nodded and stepped aside. They stood in the quiet diner, tension thick between them. "I know about the offer," Luke said flatly. Mark blinked in surprise. "How do you—" "Doesn't matter how I know," Luke interrupted. "What matters is what you're going to do now." Mark shook his head, feeling lost. "This diner, it's everything. My father built it." Luke looked him in the eye, his voice softer now. "Do you want to hold on to something built on hate? Is that your father's legacy?" Mark stood in the empty diner, staring at the floor. The knock on the door startled him. Hesitating, he opened it to find Luke Carter standing serious outside. "We need to talk, Mark," Luke said quietly, closing the door behind him. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "What's there to talk about?" Luke replied, "Your future, this diner, and the decision you need to make." Mark looked at him confused. "What decision?" Luke met his gaze. "You've been handed an opportunity. This diner can stay the same, or it can become something new. You have a chance to change things, not just for yourself, but for the whole town." Mark stayed silent as Luke's words sank in. Something stirred within him, a feeling he hadn't faced before. Maybe it was time for a change. Sitting in his small office, Mark Harris stared at the letter in his hands, its weight heavy on him. The diner, passed down from his father, felt more like a burden than a legacy. After days of hesitation, he knew he couldn't delay any longer. Taking a deep breath, Mark picked up the phone. He hesitated briefly before dialing. When the voice on the other end answered, Mark spoke in a low, tired voice. "This is Mark Harris. I'm ready to move forward with the sale." After hanging up, Mark leaned back in his chair, feeling a slight weight lift off his shoulders. Letting go of the diner meant letting go of the past. Maybe this could be the start of something new. Across town, Luke Carter's phone vibrated with a text. A smile crept onto his face. "It's done," he said, looking up at his father. "Mark agreed to sell." Cole Carter nodded. "And what's next?" Luke's smile grew. "Now we move to phase 2. It's time to turn that diner into a place that unites the town." In the following weeks, excitement buzzed through town as rumours spread about the diner's new owner. Some thought a chain was moving in. Others guessed it would be a trendy coffee shop. But when the truth emerged, everyone was shocked. On a bright Saturday morning, the remodelled diner was finally revealed. A crowd gathered, eager to see the changes. At noon, the doors opened, and everyone gasped. Standing at the entrance was Cole Carter. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his voice strong. "Welcome to the veterans' table." The crowd buzzed with surprise. Cole, who had been thrown out just weeks ago, was now the owner. He stepped aside, inviting everyone inside. Inside, the diner was transformed. Walls were adorned with photos and memorabilia honouring veterans. New deep blue booths resembled military uniforms. A stunning mural depicted soldiers of diverse backgrounds standing together, featuring 2 soldiers, one black and one white, embracing, reminiscent of a young Cole Carter and Mark Harris Sr. As people looked around, Cole stood in the center of the room. "Friends, neighbors," he said with deep emotion. "This diner has been part of our town for a long time, but it's also been a symbol of division. Today, we change that. We will make it a place of unity, understanding, and healing." Cole explained that the Veterans Table would be more than just a diner. It would support veterans and bring people together to share meals and stories. Regular events would help build understanding and break down barriers. As Cole spoke, surprise turned to excitement. People nodded, some wiped away tears. The atmosphere filled with hope. But Cole had one more surprise. "Now I'd like you to meet our new head chef," he said, pointing to the kitchen. The doors swung open and everyone fell silent. Standing there in a chef's uniform was Mark Harris. He stepped forward, looking down, preparing for the worst. But when he looked up, he saw welcoming faces. Mark took a deep breath. "I know I'm the last person you expected here. I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did was wrong." His voice steadied. "Cole and Luke Carter have given me a chance I don't deserve, a chance to learn and grow. I promise to work every day to earn the trust they've shown me." The diner fell quiet. Then someone started to clap, and others joined in. It wasn't forgiveness, but it showed that people recognized Mark's hard path and the courage it took to admit his mistakes. When the applause faded, Cole stepped forward. "This is what the Veterans Table stands for. It's about second chances and healing past wounds. I hope you will all be a part of this." With that, Cole officially opened the diner. As people mingled and tasted the food, the feeling of change filled the air. As time went on, old barriers began to break down. People talked, and the community started to heal. In the kitchen, Mark worked with his new staff, a mix of people he never would have hired before. With every meal he prepared, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He knew the journey ahead would be tough, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. Meanwhile, Cole and Luke watched as their vision came to life. "Do you think this will really work, Dad?" Luke asked softly. Cole smiled. "It's a start, son. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the world." As the day continued, the Veterans Table buzzed with energy. People who had never spoken before sat together, sharing stories and finding common ground. The walls that divided the community were starting to come down. In the following weeks and months, the Veterans Table became a symbol of hope for the town. Regular events brought people together to discuss difficult issues, bridging divides that had lasted for generations. Mark worked hard to earn the community's trust. Gradually, people began to see him not as a prejudiced man, but as an example of redemption. News of the Veterans Table spread beyond their small town. Media outlets reported on the diner and its former owner's change. A documentary filmmaker even approached Cole and Luke to share their story. But the most powerful moment came nearly a year after the diner reopened. Mark Harris Sr., living in a nursing home in another state, came for a visit. He looked frail, a shadow of the strong man he used to be. When Cole wheeled him into the diner, Mark Sr. was shocked. He looked at the mural and the diverse crowd, seeing his son happily working with people he once would have hated. For the first time in decades, tears flowed from Mark Harris Sr. "I was wrong," he whispered, holding Cole's hand tightly. "All these years, I was so wrong." That day, surrounded by the warmth of the Veterans Table, old wounds began to heal. Mark Sr. shared stories from his time in the war, not with anger, but with a new understanding. He spoke of fear, chaos, and the shared humanity of soldiers on all sides. As night fell, Cole Carter stood outside the diner, looking at the sign that read, "The Veterans Table." He reflected on the long journey that had brought them here, the pain, struggles, and moments of doubt. Inside, the diner buzzed with activity. Cole saw Mark Sr. surrounded by veterans of all ages, all listening and nodding in support. Luke came up and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Dad," he said quietly. "You changed everything." Cole smiled and shook his head. "We did it, son. Together." As they watched, they had no idea how their actions would impact the world beyond their town. The story of the veterans' table was just beginning. The next morning, while Cole prepared to open the diner, he received an unexpected call from a national news producer. They wanted to feature the veterans' table and the change it had brought to the community. At first, Cole hesitated. He didn't want recognition for their work, but he realized sharing their story might inspire others to make positive changes. So, he agreed to the interview. When the news crew arrived, the town buzzed with excitement. People gathered outside, hoping to be interviewed. Inside, Cole sat in a booth with the mural of diverse soldiers behind him. During the interview, he spoke from the heart about the pain of facing discrimination and the choice to respond with love and understanding. "It would have been easy to fight hate with more hate," Cole said. "But that would just keep the cycle going. Instead, we chose to see this as a chance for growth and healing." The reporter then turned to Mark Harris, who had joined them at the booth. His hands trembled, but his voice steadied as he shared his story of change. "I grew up with beliefs that were wrong," Mark said, tears in his eyes. "It took this experience and the kindness shown by Cole and Luke to help me see clearly. I'm not proud of my past, but I work every day to be someone I can be proud of." As the interview continued, other community members shared how the veterans' table had changed their views and brought people together. The reporter asked Cole what message he wanted people to take from their experience. "I want people to understand that change is possible, even when faced with strong prejudices," Cole said. "It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But with patience and a willingness to see the humanity in everyone, we can create a better world." As the news crew packed up, a feeling of excitement filled the air. They knew that once their story aired, things might change forever. And they were right. The feature aired on a Sunday evening, captivating millions of viewers. The response was instant and overwhelming. Social media exploded with comments, and the veterans' table became a trending topic. In the following days, visitors flooded the diner from all over the country. People drove for hours to feel the atmosphere of acceptance and healing. Community leaders reached out, eager to learn how to start similar programs. Cole and Luke received calls and emails from people nationwide seeking advice on bridging divides. The effects of their story went beyond what they had imagined. Filmmakers approached them about making a documentary, not just about the veterans' table, but about issues like prejudice and community healing. As filming began, Cole, Luke, and Mark revisited the events that led them to this moment. It wasn't always easy. Reliving painful memories brought up tough emotions, but it reminded them of how far they had come. The crew followed them for months, capturing daily life at the diner, community events, and the ongoing journey of healing. They interviewed local residents and veterans who had found a home at the veterans' table. One powerful moment came when they interviewed Mark Harris Sr. Despite his declining health, he spoke about the roots of his prejudice and the power of love and forgiveness. "I held on to anger for too long," Mark Sr. said, his voice weak but clear. "I let one terrible moment in war shape how I viewed an entire group of people. But seeing what my son and Cole have built together has opened my eyes. I wish I had learned this lesson sooner." As the documentary neared completion, excitement grew. Major film festivals wanted to show it first, and there was talk of an Oscar nomination. But for Cole, Luke, and Mark, true success wasn't about awards. It was about the small changes they noticed in their community and the inspiring stories from people touched by their work. One evening, after a long day of filming, Cole sat at the counter of the veterans' table, sipping coffee. The diner was quiet. The last customers had left. Mark was in the kitchen cleaning up, and Luke sat nearby, looking over some papers. "Hey," Cole said, breaking the silence. "When we started this, I never imagined it would go this far." Luke looked up, smiling. "So you didn't picture becoming a national symbol for community healing?" Cole laughed and shook his head. "Not at all. I just wanted to show that love can beat hatred." Mark came out of the kitchen, drying his hands. "And look at what you've done," he said, pointing around the diner. You've changed so many lives, especially mine." Cole placed his hand on Mark's shoulder. "We've all changed, Mark. We're on this journey together." As they sat there, the three men, who once stood on different sides of a divide, felt amazed at how far they had come. They had no idea their journey was just beginning. The release of the documentary would inspire movements for change and reconciliation. The premiere of the documentary, Table of Brotherhood, the Veterans Table Story took place in a full theatre in New York City. Cole, Luke, and Mark walked the red carpet, something none of them expected. As they sat down, surrounded by film leaders and civil rights activists, they felt both excited and nervous about how their story would be received. The film opened with the diner incident, showing racism without holding back. Many audience members gasped when they saw how Mark treated Cole. But as the story progressed, showing how both men and their community changed, the mood in the theatre shifted. By the end, there were tears everywhere, and the applause was loud and long. When Cole, Luke, and Mark walked on stage for a Quanda session, they received a standing ovation. The audience asked thoughtful questions. One person asked Cole how he found the strength to forgive Mark. "Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay," Cole replied. "It's about choosing not to let hatred take over your life. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone, even those who have hurt you. It's not easy, but it's important for moving forward as a society." Another audience member asked Mark what he would say to those with the same prejudices he once had. Mark took a deep breath. "Holding on to hate only hurts you. It stops you from seeing the beauty and diversity and the amazing experiences you can have when you open your heart. I wasted years being angry and afraid. Don't make the same mistake." The documentary had an immediate impact. A major streaming service picked it up, allowing millions worldwide to watch it. The story of the Veterans Table sparked important discussions about race and community healing. Closer to home, the diner became a popular destination. People from all over came to experience the welcoming atmosphere. Cole, Luke, and Mark were invited to speak at events about community building and reconciliation, always stressing that positive change could happen anywhere. The diner continued to grow, expanding its operations while focusing on supporting veterans. They started a mentorship program, pairing veterans with at-risk youth, providing guidance and support while giving veterans a renewed sense of purpose. Over time, the impact of the Veterans Table spread. Other communities began creating their own versions of the diner, working together to tackle divisions and promote healing. About a year after the documentary's release, Cole received a call from a national civil rights organization. They had watched the documentary and were moved by the story. They invited Cole, Luke, and Mark to their annual conference to share their experiences. At the conference, walking through halls filled with civil rights leaders felt surreal. Their journey had been incredible. During their presentation, they felt humbled and inspired. The audience listened closely as they shared their story, asking thoughtful questions and expressing admiration for their accomplishments. The president of the organization said, "You've created a path for healing in communities across the country. You've shown that change is possible, even with deep-rooted prejudice." As they left the conference, the organization announced a new national initiative inspired by the Veterans Table This initiative aimed to promote community healing and racial reconciliation across the country, with Cole, Luke, and Mark invited to serve as advisors. The news and the new initiative brought fresh attention to the Veterans Table News crews arrived in the small town, eager to capture the community's reaction. However, despite all the excitement, Cole, Luke, and Mark focused on their work. They understood that real change came from the everyday efforts of dedicated people, not from big gestures or fame. Back at the diner, life continued as usual. Veterans found support within its walls. Community members from all backgrounds came together over meals, sharing stories and building connections. Mark, once a symbol of prejudice in the town, continued his journey of growth and redemption. One evening, as the sun set and the last customers left, Cole saw Mark standing in front of the mural, deep in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" Cole asked, joining him. Mark took a moment. "I was just thinking about my father. He would be proud of what we've done, but sad about all the years he spent in anger." Cole nodded, sensing Mark's mixed feelings. "Your father's journey reminds us that it's never too late to change. His story is part of what makes this place special." As they stood looking at the mural of soldiers from all races, they heard the door open. Luke entered, excitement on his face. "You won't believe this," Luke exclaimed, waving a letter. "We've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize." Cole and Mark looked at each other in shock. A Nobel Peace Prize? It was hard to believe that their small-town diner could be nominated for such a prestigious award. "The nomination mentions our work in community healing and racial reconciliation," Luke read. "It says we've created a model for addressing deep societal divisions peacefully." As the news sank in, Cole felt a rush of emotions: pride, humility, and renewed determination. "Well," Cole said with a smile, "I guess we'd better get back to work. We still have a lot of healing to do." Mark nodded and Luke chuckled at his father's calm response to such big news. As they locked up the diner that night, the three men reflected on their incredible journey, from a single act of prejudice to a movement changing lives across the nation. The Veterans Table had become more than just a diner. It was a symbol of hope, proof of forgiveness's power, and an example of what can be achieved when people unite to heal old wounds. Walking into the quiet night, the glowing neon sign of the Veterans Table shone warmly behind them. A beacon of the light they had brought into a world often overshadowed by division. The story of Cole Carter, Luke Carter, and Mark Harris was far from over. In many ways, it felt like it was just beginning. With every life they touched and every barrier they broke down, they were writing a new chapter in America's journey toward true equality and understanding. And it all started with a simple act of forgiveness in a small-town diner. If you were in Cole Carter's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have found the strength to forgive and turn a painful experience into something positive? Share your thoughts in the comments below. It's over to you guys. What is your remark on this amazing story? Let us know in the comment. Until then, take care